Greetings, philosophical YouTubers. In the previous series, we discovered that sense gets expressed in the proposition, which we hold as synonymous from the magical point of view as sense gets expressed in the proposition. In this, the fourth series of dualities, Deleuze begins with the main duality of cause and effect. He ascribes causes to bodies which produce, by their states of affairs, incorporeal events, which are effects of those bodies. And he'll make the bold statement that these events do not exist outside of the propositions which express them. Therefore, the duality is now between things or bodies and language. He'll say that this duality runs throughout the works of Lewis Carroll in the form of to eat or to speak. To eat concerns a body consuming another body, whereas to speak obviously has to do with language. He'll say that the operational model for bodies is to eat and to be eaten. And this connects with an esoteric idea that the energy we give off becomes food for one thing or another. For example, G.I. Gurdjieff has the idea that the involuntary mechanical energy we give off without thinking about it, he calls that food for the moon. Deleuze will say that the duality between things and propositions is less a case of a radical duality and more like a frontier between the two, between things and language, and this frontier gets represented by sense, because sense gets expressed in the proposition, but sense, he says, is also an ideational attribute of things. Deleuze will use one example from Carroll's The Hunting of the Snark, from the refrain, which goes, "They sought it with thimbles, they sought it with care. They pursued it with forks and hope." So thimbles and forks are instruments or bodies, and hope and care, he says, are consideration of sense, or the events that these bodies, that happen to these bodies. He'll say that he'll make the observation that it's often the case in Lewis Carroll that sense is presented as something one must take care of. And this connects with the idea that sense has fragility. It's fragile. He'll bring Humpty Dumpty into the mix as a master of language, and he'll quote the section where Humpty Dumpty is speaking about language. And he'll say, Humpty Dumpty will say, "They've a temper, some of them, particularly verbs. They're the proudest. Adjectives you can do anything with, but not verbs. However, I can manage the whole lot of them." And then he says, "Impenetrability. That's what I say." And when asked, or when he goes on to explain impenetrability, Humpty Dumpty says he's had enough of that subject, which exemplifies the impenetrability. Deleuze will say this impenetrability concerns the impassibility of sense. In other words, possibly the inability to reduce sense to something else. He'll also say that this impenetrability has to do with the fact that events only exist on the surface. There's nothing to penetrate, whereas bodies have depth and which can be penetrated. Now, Deleuze will say that the duality between things and language really moves inside the proposition itself, because things, we still need language to denote things. And he'll sort of connect bodies and things with nouns, and he'll connect events with verbs. But he'll say that the duality inside the proposition is not really between nouns and verbs, but more between two dimensions of the proposition, between the dimension he calls denotation and sense. So this is the duality, and he'll say that this duality only comes together in an esoteric word, and there's a later series on esoteric words, and these are words which both denote something and express the sense of that thing at the same time. So we'll get into that more later. I almost forgot to mention that Humpty Dumpty, sitting on the narrow wall, can represent the frontier between things and language, and by inference, the fragility of sense. When Humpty Dumpty falls, he off the wall, he can't be put together again. From the magical or Kabbalistic point of view, we note that the fourth letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Daleth, corresponds with the English letter D, as in the fourth series of dualities. Now, Daleth connects the duality on the tree of life. It connects the pillar of mercy with the pillar of severity, which are which have a dual nature, the two of them. It also connects the archetypal mother with the archetypal father. In Chinese philosophy, this represents the duality of yin and yang. So here we see an occult parallel series of duality, parallel to what Deleuze is writing about in this series. Also, the first example Deleuze has of dualities when he speaks of Lewis Carroll's to eat or to speak. That concerns, obviously, the mouth, two functions of the mouth. Now, Kabbalistically, the mouth corresponds with the path called pei, which is another path that connects the duality of the pillar of severity with the pillar of mercy. And pei is also considered a sort of entry point into magic. So this has occult significance also. And with that, we'll see you next time.